She was found handcuffed. Alone. In her own bathroom. No broken windows. No kicked-in doors. No signs of a struggle from the outside. Whoever did this, she let in herself. And for 26 years, the man responsible walked free, organized high school reunions, drove strangers around in his car, and lived an ordinary life while a fifth-grade teacher named Catherine Edwards got no justice and her parents spent the rest of their lives waiting for a phone call that took too long to come. This is the story of how science caught a ghost. And how one woman's trust became the weapon used against her. Like this video right now, subscribe to True Crime Traces, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. This case is going to stay with you. She was 31 years old. Her name was Mary Catherine Edwards and she taught 5th grade at Price Elementary in Beaumont, Texas. She was the kind of teacher students remembered for the rest of their lives. Not because she was dramatic or loud or extraordinary in any way that announces itself, but because she was present. She saw her kids. The shy ones, the withdrawn ones, the ones who sat in the back and hoped nobody called on them. She let them be exactly who they were, and for a lot of children that age, that kind of quiet acceptance is the thing that changes everything. She had an identical twin sister named Allison, who also taught in the same school district. The two of them looked so much alike that Catherine had a ritual at the start of every school year. She would tell her new students, "If you ever see another one of me in the hallway and she doesn't speak to you, don't get your feelings hurt. It's probably just my sister." The students loved that. It was the kind of thing that made her feel real to them, a person with a life outside the classroom, with a family, with a story. Catherine lived alone with her beagle Maggie in a townhouse on Park Meadow Drive. Her principal said she would normally stay late after school preparing her lesson plans for the next day. She was described by the people who knew her as loving, trusting, and maybe a little naive about the world. She had grown up in Beaumont, graduated from Forest Park High School, and stayed in the area her whole life. She was part of a tight circle of friends from school and college, where she had joined a sorority. She walked the dog, prepared her lessons, spent time with her family. She lived quietly and happily, the way people do when they feel safe where they are. She was close with her parents who lived nearby. On the afternoon of Friday, January 13, 1995, Catherine left Price Elementary around 5 o'clock. She went home, walked Maggie, poured herself a glass of wine, and called her boyfriend. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. By Saturday morning, her parents were standing inside her townhouse, and Catherine was gone. The first officer to respond to the 911 call was a woman named Carmen Brownapple. When dispatch read out the victim's name, she went still for a moment. They had been in the same sorority. Brownapple would later say that Catherine was so full of life, and that arriving at that scene and realizing it was her just knocked her for a minute. Some things you cannot prepare yourself for no matter how long you've worn the badge. Catherine had been sexually assaulted. She had more than 30 injuries on her body. The medical examiner initially ruled cause of death as drowning. He would later change that to entrapment asphyxiation. The weight of her attacker pressing down from behind had compressed her chest until she simply could not breathe anymore. It would have taken between 5 and 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes of Catherine unable to move, unable to fight back, unable to scream. The handcuffs made sure of that. The DNA recovered from the crime scene that day was entered into CODIS, the FBI's national database of DNA collected from convicted offenders. No match came back. Detectives fanned out immediately. They collected samples from Catherine's ex-boyfriend, from neighbors, from acquaintances, from colleagues. Every single sample was tested. Every single one came back negative. Evidence from the bedroom was tested too, a comforter from her bed, the shirt she had been wearing, bed sheets, her fingernail clippings. Some items couldn't produce usable results because the technology available in 1995 simply wasn't sensitive enough to work with degraded or low-quantity samples. But the evidence that did produce results told a very clear story. One unknown male. A single profile. Consistent. Undeniable. And then there were the handcuffs. Professional grade. Smith & Wesson. Police restraints. Investigators traced them by serial number and hit a dead end almost immediately. Whoever had brought those into Catherine's home either was law enforcement, or had gone to considerable effort to appear that way. Officers were questioned. DNA was collected. Not a single officer matched the profile. One detective described the atmosphere around the case as almost like a ghost story told around a campfire. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. But the question hovering over every conversation was whether the killer could be one of their own. The absence of forced entry meant Catherine had opened that door herself. She had seen whoever was standing on the other side of it and felt safe enough to let them in. Every lead dried up. The case went cold. But Catherine's parents did not go quiet. Year after year, they called the detectives' line and asked for updates. Year after year, there was nothing new to tell them. And they kept calling anyway, because what else do you do when the system that is supposed to give you answers keeps coming back empty? The Beaumont community didn't forget either. Former students who had been 10 years old the year she was killed grew up carrying her memory. One said years later that Catherine allowing him to be his shy and withdrawn self had helped him come out of his shell entirely. Another said hearing about the state they found her in was horrible, because she was just such a real nice lady. The case had no momentum, but it had people. Detectives who inherited the file kept working it. They preserved the DNA, maintained the evidence, and ran Cody's checks every single time the national database expanded. New states kept adding mandatory DNA collection requirements for certain offenders, and every time the database grew, detectives ran Catherine's profile against it again. Nothing came back. Not once. In 2010, Detective Aaron Llewellyn started over from the very beginning. He pulled crime scene photographs and videos. He reread every report. He checked into the dozens of suspects that early detectives had already excluded. He built a cold case list and the Edwards case was on it. The problem was brutally simple: traditional forensic tools had been exhausted years ago. Cody's only works if the killer's DNA is already in the system. Mandatory collection from convicted offenders didn't begin in most states until the mid to late 1990s. If this man had committed his crimes before that window, he would have no profile in any database anywhere. He could have a criminal record and the system would never surface him. He could be living a completely normal life and nobody would ever know. In 2020, 25 years after the murder, the Texas Rangers Unsolved Crimes Investigation Program and Beaumont Police Department renewed their push. Jefferson County District Attorney Bob Wortham had made the Edwards case a personal priority from the day he was sworn into office. He met with the Beaumont police chief and told him to put his best people on it. Texas Ranger Brandon Best took the lead and began looking seriously at genetic genealogy as a path forward. The idea behind genetic genealogy is as elegant as it is powerful. Even if a killer never voluntarily submitted his DNA to a consumer ancestry testing company, a distant relative might have. And from that distant relative's profile, you can begin building a family tree, working backward through generations, branch by branch, name by name, until you identify the specific person who matches the crime scene. It requires patience. It requires precision. And it requires something that the original investigators in 1995 could never have imagined having access to. A $6,000 reward was offered. Investigators partnered with Astrium, a forensic DNA laboratory near Houston that specializes in recovering usable profiles from degraded or contaminated evidence. The crime scene sample was a mixture of Catherine and an unknown male. Standard testing in 1995 had only been able to read about 20 genetic markers from the combined sample. Astrium's technology could read hundreds of thousands. Their lab processed the degraded evidence, separated the male DNA from Catherine's, and extracted more than 500,000 individual genetic markers. 500,000. From a sample that had been sitting in an evidence locker for a quarter of a century. That was enough to build a profile strong enough for genetic genealogy work. The profile was uploaded to GeneMatch, a public ancestry database where people voluntarily share their test results. And second cousins of the unknown male appeared in the results. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this story all the way through. Detectives and forensic genealogist Cheryl Lapointe began building the family tree outward from those second cousin matches. Over roughly 3 months, they contacted distant relatives one by one and asked each of them for a voluntary DNA sample. More than 30 people cooperated. Connections were confirmed on both the paternal and maternal sides of one particular family. The tree was narrowing. The branches were collapsing inward toward a single point. It came down to 2 brothers. Both had grown up in Beaumont. Both had attended Forest Park High School, the same school as Catherine Edwards. Lapointe was working the case late one night when those names finally came through. She sent a message to Detective Tina Llewellyn and told her there were a couple of brothers in Beaumont she needed to look at. Then she went to bed. When she woke up the next morning, her phone had completely blown up. Tina Llewellyn and her husband Aaron, also a Beaumont detective, ran the first brother's name through criminal records overnight. Nothing. Not even a traffic violation. Aaron ran the second brother's name. He had a conviction for sexual assault. Jefferson County. 1981. Aaron Llewellyn later said the hair on the back of his neck stood straight up when he opened that case file. Because the method in the 1981 conviction was nearly identical, in pattern, in detail, in the specific way the crime had unfolded, to what had been done to Catherine Edwards 14 years later. On a rainy night in July of 1981, a 19-year-old woman named Paula Ramsey left a nightclub off Interstate 10 in Beaumont. Her car had gotten stuck in a ditch outside the bar. It had been raining hard and she slipped trying to get it out. She gave up and started walking toward a gas station to call her mother. A man was sitting in a parked car nearby, window down. She recognized him from Forest Park. He told her he was a police officer and offered her a ride home. She was wet. She was stranded. And an offer from someone claiming to be a cop felt safe. She got in. He didn't drive her home. He drove to a field, stopped the car, and his entire demeanor changed. He told her to stop. He told her to shut up. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a knife. He bound her hands behind her back with a belt. And he raped her. Repeatedly. Then he drove her home. Paula didn't tell anyone for about a week. She felt ashamed. She wondered if anyone would believe her. She wondered if somehow, in some way she couldn't quite articulate, it was her fault. She would later say she just felt awful, like she could never tell another living soul what had happened to her. When she finally went to police, the man was charged. But he pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, not rape. And he received 3 years of probation. Not a prison sentence. Probation. For binding a woman's hands behind her back and raping her at knife point while pretending to be a police officer. He was 21 years old at the time and working as a salesman. Paula Ramsey and Catherine Edwards had both attended Forest Park High School. In both cases, the woman's hands were bound behind her back and she was sexually assaulted. In 1981, he told Paula he was a police officer to make her feel safe enough to get into his car. In 1995, the killer used professional police-grade handcuffs on Catherine. The signature was the same. The psychology was the same. The man was the same. And there was more. In 1986, 5 years after the rape and 4 years into his marriage, another woman from the same school community reported that he came to her apartment and held her at gunpoint. Catherine Edwards had also attended Forest Park. And she and her twin sister Allison had been bridesmaids in this man's 1982 wedding to his first wife, Diana Dalio Co. The wedding was a year after the rape of Paula Ramsey. He knew Catherine. She knew him. She had stood beside his bride in a wedding photograph, smiling. There was no forced entry at her townhouse because she had no reason to be afraid of the man standing on the other side of that door. His ex-wife testified at trial that she had discovered, just 3 weeks before their wedding, that the man she was about to marry was on probation for rape. She confronted him. He told her it was a big misunderstanding. That the charges had been dropped. She believed him. Looking back years later, she said there were things she noticed during the marriage that only made sense afterward. He kept a billy club beside the bed. He had ordered a pair of Smith & Wesson handcuffs and hung them over the rearview mirror of his car. They were married for 11 years. They divorced in 1993, 2 years before Catherine was murdered. When his ex-wife heard the news about Catherine's death, she called him. She told him that somebody had murdered Catherine Edwards. His response was 2 words. "Oh, really?" His name was Clayton Foreman. Foreman had left Beaumont in 2007 and moved to Reynoldsburg, Ohio, just outside Columbus, where he was living with his fiancée. He worked as a rideshare driver. In 2018 he came back to Beaumont for his high school reunion. He was the one who had organized it. He put together the memorial slides for classmates who had died. He coordinated the program, contacted families, managed the tributes. People who attended described him as thoughtful. Said no one would have expected anything like this from him in a million years. On April 15, 2021, with assistance from the Reynoldsburg Police Department, a local detective placed Foreman's home under surveillance and then conducted a trash pull from the curb after Foreman brought his bags out and went back inside. The detective catalogued each item with DNA potential carefully and methodically. Hair. A plastic fork. A plastic spoon. 5 empty medicine bottles with Clayton Foreman's name printed directly on the labels. Dental floss. Every item was packaged and shipped to the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Houston for comparison against the 1995 crime scene profile. On April 28, the results came back. The DNA recovered from the discarded trash matched the DNA from Catherine's sexual assault kit. The statistical likelihood of that being a coincidence, 461 septillion to 1. A number with 26 zeros after it. The next day, April 29, Texas Ranger Brandon Best and Detective Aaron Llewellyn flew to Ohio. Foreman agreed to come to the local police station voluntarily. They told him he was not under arrest. They told him he was free to leave at any point. Ranger Best even changed seats so that Foreman was sitting closest to the door, a deliberate, calculated gesture designed to keep him comfortable and in the room. What followed was 49 minutes of recorded conversation. Foreman said he vaguely remembered Catherine and Allison being bridesmaids in his wedding but denied having any other contact with Catherine beyond that day. He claimed he didn't even know she was dead. When investigators showed him the wedding photograph, Catherine and Allison standing right beside his bride, he confirmed it was his 1982 wedding and repeated that he had no connection to either sister past that single occasion. Best and Llewellyn backed him into a series of hard corners, one careful question at a time, each one closing off another exit. Near the end of the interview, Ranger Best told him directly. His DNA had been found on Catherine's bed. Inside Catherine's body. Foreman paused. He said he didn't know how it got there. But that they were saying it was there. Best told him there was only one way for it to get there. He told Foreman that 2 people knew exactly what happened inside the townhouse on the night of January 13, 1995. And one of them was dead. Foreman ended the interview and asked for a lawyer. They let him walk out of the room. Roughly 30 seconds later, officers stopped him in the hallway. And they placed Clayton Foreman under arrest for capital murder, using the same pair of Smith & Wesson handcuffs that had been removed from Catherine Edwards' wrists 26 years earlier. Ranger Best had worked with prosecutors specifically to have that evidence released from storage for this single moment. He would later say it was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. It felt like they got to do something for Catherine in a physical, tangible way. The cuffs that bound her the night she was killed were the same ones used to take him away. Foreman fought extradition from Ohio. He refused to leave his cell for the hearing. A governor's warrant was prepared and sent to the governor of Ohio. After weeks of delays and legal maneuvering, he was finally transported back to Jefferson County, Texas. The trial began in March of 2024. Nearly 30 years after Catherine's death. Her parents had both died before they could see this day come. Bob Wortham, the district attorney who had made the case his mission from his very first day in office, had left office before the trial began. Prosecutor Pat Noth had worked the Edwards case from the DA's side for years. Standing before the jury on the first day, he told them he had waited 29 years to bring justice to Catherine's family. He wished her parents had lived to sit in that courtroom. No parent, he said, should ever have to go through what they went through. 7 days of prosecution testimony. 73 potential witnesses listed by the state. One of the first to take the stand was Allison, Catherine's twin sister, now 60 years old. She stood in front of a packed courtroom and described the days leading up to her sister's murder. She told the jury that Catherine was trusting. Maybe too trusting. And Foreman sat calmly at the defense table through all of it like a man watching a movie he had already seen. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, the crime scene evidence, the clothing Catherine had been wearing, the handcuffs, and the results of the sexual assault kit. Expert witnesses from multiple laboratories walked the jury methodically through the full arc of DNA technology, from the original 20-marker profile extracted in 1995 all the way to the 500,000 marker profile that Astrium produced in 2020. 20 markers to 500,000. That is the distance between a cold case and a conviction. The defense called 0 witnesses. Clayton Foreman did not take the stand. His attorney told the jury that after 29 years, evidence degrades and memories change. He argued that the DNA alone wasn't sufficient. He pointed to an unidentified male DNA profile discovered under Catherine's fingernails and suggested that someone else might have been present that night, a second figure, a missing piece, reasonable doubt. The prosecution's response was brief and devastating. Catherine's hands had been cuffed behind her back the entire time she was alive in that room. She could not have scratched her attacker. Whatever trace DNA was found under her fingernails could have come from any one of dozens of people who handled that evidence over the course of 3 decades. It proved nothing. It explained nothing. It was a ghost the defense had invented and dressed up as a question. Then, on the final day of trial, the prosecution called Paula Ramsey. She was in her early 60s now. More than 4 decades had passed since the night in the field. The judge instructed the jury carefully before she took the stand. They were about to hear evidence of another crime committed by the defendant. Paula Ramsey walked to the witness box, sat down, and looked out across the courtroom. She identified Clayton Foreman from where she sat. She testified through tears about the knife, the belt, the field, the rain, the night that followed her for the rest of her life. When asked why she had come forward now, why she had put herself through this again after everything, she said she wanted to see justice done for Catherine. The jury deliberated for 52 minutes. Guilty. Capital murder. Judge John Stevens sentenced Clayton Foreman to life in prison. He will not be eligible for parole until he is 93 years old. He is appealing his conviction. Ranger Best had said early in the investigation that they always suspected the killer was someone known to the family. But nobody had imagined it would be someone who was actually in the wedding party. Someone who had stood at the altar and smiled for photographs. Someone whose name was written in the memory of everyone who attended that day. Catherine opened the door that night because she recognized the face on the other side of it. A man from her high school. A man whose wedding she had been a part of. No reason to be afraid. No reason to hesitate. No reason in the world not to let him in. Catherine Edwards was 31 years old. She taught 5th grade and had an identical twin sister and a beagle named Maggie and students who remembered her for the rest of their lives. She was trusting. She was loving. She was exactly the kind of person the world cannot afford to lose. And the handcuffs Clayton Foreman used to restrain her the night he took her life are the same ones they used to lead him away. Justice arrived late. But it arrived. If Catherine's story moved you, if you believe that cold cases deserve to be solved no matter how many years go by, share this video right now and write in the comments, "Justice for Catherine." Let's make sure her name keeps being said. Subscribe to True Crime Traces so you never miss a case, because every single story we tell here belongs to a real person who deserves to be remembered. We'll see you in the next one.